we have to let them know that we are bringing the war to them. So that and the 1952 shooting in the Congress, which Francis was gonna tell you about, having, you know, when you think of the United States history, how many examples can you identify of a colonial peoples going into the premises of the government to shoot them, to say you have to give us our independence now, and we are what are you? It's not a common. It doesn't happen too often. It's one of the few instances in history that has happened, and I think we're proud of that. Like we've taken the fucking guns into places where people wouldn't dream of.
Welcome, everybody, to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. Today, I have a couple of guests, and we're going to do something that we haven't really done much at all in this podcast over the last 8 years, which is talk about Puerto Rico. And, shout out to Dana. She suggested this episode to us. And, like many things, I think there's a lot of conversations that we could have about Puerto Rico, but I thought, we really haven't even done the basic work to really talk about the history, right? And certainly this is, a history that's integral to the United States and U.S. imperialism and colonialism, right? But it's also one that, we're often not really taught in a lot of detail. It's also one that I think even on the left, folks, don't study as much, maybe a little bit more when you had kind of certain heights of the Puerto Rican Independence Movement in the past. There was a bit of a connection there, particularly among leftists from a kind of anti-colonial perspective, right? We could think of groups like the Young Lords or the FALN, but really to talk about those histories or to talk about recent struggles from Puerto Rico, I think, we really needed to do a conversation to talk about some of the history of the colonization of Puerto Rico, both by the Spanish as well as the United States. And, talk about some of the history of the independence movement in Puerto Rico, some of the history of the different struggles of Puerto Rican people resisting colonialism and imperialism, right? And so we have a couple of guests here today from the island, Francisco Santiago and Sebastián Castrodad Reverón. Gentlemen, please correct me if I mispronounced your names. I apologies in advance, but I'm going to bring you both up to the stage so that you can both kind of introduce yourself a little bit more than just sharing your names as I did before we jump into this conversation. So Sebastián and Francisco, welcome.
Hi. Happy to be here.
It's good to be with you. Yeah, Sebastián, why don't you share a little bit just about yourself, and then Francisco, you can introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Sebastián Castrodad Reverón, but that's a mouthful in English, I understand. I was born in San Juan, and right now I live in the west coast of Puerto Rico. I am an organizer, documentarist, activist, and writer. And I have Puerto Rican nationalism in my blood, you could say. So since I was brought up, I always have inside me like the struggle and in mind, and It's not until like some few years ago where I decided to actually commit to my political formation through and through.
Well, you did not do too bad with my name. I would just add Santiago Cintrón, just if by chance my mom is seeing this, she will not kill me, because obviously she always points out the no her last name also. But not nothing. Like I said before, my name is Francisco Santiago Cintrón. Thank you for the opportunity, for the space, and for the attention to this theme. Obviously, that for us is very important. I was born in Guayama, which is a city in the southeast coast of Puerto Rico. Right now I live in San Juan. In terms of activism, no, I think since the university, with a difference from Seba, in my case, my family has nothing, has no history at all with activism, so it was a bit how do you say, it's a mixture of chance, yes, some influence in the family, and external too, but in general terms, a lot of activism in the university specifically, and then in various organizations that have led me to be right now in the Democracia Socialista, is the organization where I am participating right now, and in a journal, a political critic journal, Critica, Cuaderno de Discusión Política. Plus, I do right now am very much involved in the labor movement, because my work is as a labor lawyer in the labor syndicalized area. No, so that's basically what we're doing right now.
Awesome. Thank you. So where do you guys want to start this history? Obviously this is kind of like, you can pick a moment, right? Like there's obviously a long history of Puerto Rico that, goes back for centuries and centuries, right? But, start us out somewhere and let's move from there.
Yeah, so we're gonna mostly talk about like the independence struggle movement, more in the modern sense of the word, just before, like, from the 19th century out. Even though you could say, like, I wanted to start off reading this phrase from Jose de Diego, which was leader of the autonomist group party, and later like one of our most known independentista in Puerto Rico. He was also a poet, where he talks about the importance of the revolutionary spirit since the day the Spaniards made landfall in Puerto Rico. And the phrase goes, the first Indian that withdrew, horrorized, and went into the jungle, the first Indian that had his eyes filled with sacred rage, lightened, and contemplated that sublime intruder etched into the air and stamped in history with the fire burning in his raging gaze, that first gesture of the Puerto Rican peoples in the initiation of their struggle for national independence. So, just a brief account. Our ancestors were virtually exterminated. Not like right now, we're in a historical making theater where we're trying to reclaim and trying to rediscover how our roots are still here, and how we were really exterminated. That there's a newly found discourse that establishes that was also a myth, the myth of extermination. But it was something that really went into our collective psyche for hundreds of years, right? Because the Spaniards committed atrocities in Puerto Rico, right? But because that's, well, I'm not an expert in any way, and especially in that scenario, that's not my area of most knowledge. I will start it off in the 19th century, which is the century that we actually establish like our national identity as in opposition to Spanish rule. So So you could say like our notion of our national identity is also forged through the opposition of the dominance and rule of the Spanish colonizers. Uh, I want to talk about a little bit of the geopolitical context in the 19th century, so we would know where we're at. In the 1800s, the whole of Latin America started their national independence struggle in the different nations of Latin America. One of the most, important figures of that movement was Simón Bolívar. And Simón Bolívar thought about, making a big America, and part of his plan was also to liberate the Antilles, including Cuba and Puerto Rico. Just fast forward to that history, in the 1820s, every Latin American nation who was a former Spain colony was free, except for Cuba and Puerto Rico. So in the 1920s, you'd have a lot of influence of that, freedom fever, you could say, at the coming and seeping into our island. But what also happened was that a lot of Creole elites criolla, and Spaniards fleeing from the nations that were immersed in war took refuge in Puerto Rico. We were like the most easterly, you could say, in the Caribbean nation that you could basically navigate towards Spain directly. And we had a phenomena of just having, political heads or as people that owned haciendas or slave owners, and even like Spanish military men come and seek refuge in Puerto Rico. So the ground took a newfound, like we were an abandoned colony, right? We in the 18th century, contraband was basically our source of economy because Spain would seldomly come to Puerto Rico and administer its colony. So we had to fend for ourselves. But suddenly, in the 19th century, we became somewhat important to the plan of reacquiring colonies or squashing, some revolutionary fervor in distant or different nations of the Latin American continent. So in that context, we can talk about how there started to surge, early signs of anti-colonialism and the desire for freedom and abolition. Because we have to remember that the Bolivarian project was also an abolitionist project where they sought to, abolish slavery because it was one of the requisites that Haiti and Petillon, one of the leaders of the government in Haiti, when he talked with Bolivar when he was exiled in Haiti after he lost his first attempt of independence in Venezuela. Bolivar asking for arms and munitions and help, military help, and Petillon went like, yes, but you have to abolish slavery. There's later controversies around that subject with Bolivar that he didn't follow through the way he was supposed to, but that's another podcast, right? So then you have the Puerto Ricans being sent out with the Spanish military to go to Caracas in the early 1800s to fight against Venezuelans fighting for their freedom. So you had the Spanish crown trying to turn Puerto Ricans against their Venezuelan brothers and sisters. And that was one of the first instances that you could say that it's been documented that there's a separation, like in action, like in military action. There was there was a lot of Puerto Rican people that were to be sent there that just said, no, we're not gonna go take up arms against our brothers and sisters in Caracas. So you had uprisings, like you had protests in Puerto Rico, and the commissary that was in charge of mobilizing the troops to Venezuela had to cancel them plans because the riots, the people were just protesting against that. And he even had to let some Venezuelan deputies that were imprisoned in El Morro, he had to let them free because the Puerto Rican people's will was such that they just, denied, they boycotted that attempt. So that's an honorable, one of the first signs of that nationalistic spirit, but also very importantly, is the establishment of that pan-American consciousness, anti-colonial consciousness, which is something that distinguishes us to this day. So, apart from that, I'm gonna list a couple examples. I mean, to pave the way to 1868, which is one of the seminal moments in history of Puerto Rican independence movement, which is El Grito de Lares, and we'll get there soon enough. So you had people revolting in you have enslaved people revolting in their haciendas against their mayordomos. You had people revolting also for the liberation of Puerto Rico. One of the most dangerous rebellions of the first decades actually was in Guayama, Francisco's hometown. Where rebels, the insurrectionists, were fighting not only for abolition but also for national liberation. So there's a sense that not generally, but there's in a medular way, the abolitionist struggle and the national liberation struggle were coupled. There's obvious big exceptions because there's criollo bourgeoisie that didn't favor abolition, right? But in the building of our conception of our ideological independence struggle, we like to take to heart the abolition spirit as well. In 1822, there was ex-general that fought for Bolivar's armed forces in Venezuela, who was living in Curacao. And then a Puerto Rican envoy went there with money and told him, bro, you got to come down here to Puerto Rico and help us liberate the land. And they took together, this is 1822, I don't know if I said the date. They put together 14 troops and about 6,000 firearms with munitions, and they bought 7 ships. They were about to embark to come down to Puerto Rico and liberate the struggle to liberate Puerto Rico as part of the Bolivarian project. But some rats called governments in Puerto Rico, and the Puerto Rican government, the Spanish Puerto Rican government, told the Curacao government, and they didn't let embarkations leave the port. So there's a sense that the Puerto Rican independence struggle is a series of frustrated events of trying to gather our independence, as obviously we're still a colony, right? In 1823, 2 colonels were accused of conspiracy to incite rebellion for independence from within the colonial army. So obviously you have Puerto Ricans in the colonial army. And one was exiled, the other was imprisoned. In 1824, you got more people getting imprisoned and exiled for conspiring for independence. And in 1826, it's a particularly interesting date because a group of Puerto Ricans and Cubans get together and they form what is called La Junta Patriótica. like the Patriotic Council, to cooperate with a Bolivarian expedition that was to fight throughout the Antilles, because Bolivar had given the command directly to Valero and Arnaiz. They were both Puerto Ricans to command that expedition. The United States and England voted against the effort in the Panama Congress of 1826. But the interesting part here is that you start to see how Cuba and Puerto Rico started sharing one same struggle for both nations' independence. That followed through all the way all to Cuba's independence. That, sadly, something happened that they couldn't follow through to come here and help us out. United States again intervened. I'll get to that later. In 1829, Bolivar writes that famous quote, his omen, that he says, "The United States appear to be destined by Providence to plague America with misery in the name of liberty." He had, some people think like the thwarting of the expeditions to the Caribbean, led him to get inspired to talk about this. And I wanted to quote here Don Ramon Medina Ramirez, which is a historian, one of the classic historians of the independentista struggles in Puerto Rico. He was also a communist, fellow commie. In his book, The Libertary Movement in the History of Puerto Rico, he wrote, "Fatality incarnate in North American imperialism impeded the realization of our independence." He argues that revolutionary fervor had definitely taken hold of Puerto Rican hearts, and you could see in the pattern in history that there were continuous uprisings. In 1835, there was military mutiny. There were around 1,500 troops that were in mutiny. They were Loizaiga was the captain. He was exiled, and others were reprimanded. In 1839, you had another, intent at insurrections. There, 2 sergeants were given the death penalty, and through asphyxiation in Garroteville, which was a very horrible way to die. It's like an almost medieval way to die. So you could see like how the consequences became more draconian for the people conspiring for freedom. Then the next 25 years after 1939 were of relatively, less oppression, because Spain was worried about their own internal turmoil. They had to deal with rebellions against the monarchy because of monarchical overreach that caused uprising all throughout the Iberian Peninsula. So you know how that goes. If you cannot administer the metropolis, the colonies become an afterthought, right? But in 1864, the Dominican Republic was in its own revolutionary process. Then Spain tried to get Puerto Ricans to go to the Dominican Republic to fight against their Dominican independentista brothers and sisters. And also, there was a lot of resentment from Puerto Ricans. There was a manifesto published. I'm going to read it. It's not too long. It read this way. Puerto Ricans, a regiment of volunteers from Puerto Rico has been taken by force to assassinate the brothers from Santo Domingo. We have complained against it. Many of ours scattered through the woods, and some had even committed suicide before consenting to kill our brothers. And if we're forcibly taken, let us go to our Dominican brothers' side, that they will welcome us with open arms and blessings. So the protest against those actions by the government of trying to send Puerto Ricans to go to the Dominican Republic were such that they rapidly, quietly exiled the commander that was supposed to lead that uprising against the government actions. In 1864, we're super close to El Grito de Lares, so I'm gonna start paving the road to talk about El Grito de Lares. In 1867, we meet two of our biggest patriots, nationalists from the 19th century, called Ramón Emeterio Betances, which is also known as El Padre de la Patria, Homeland's father, and Segundo Ruiz Belvis. They were super bros, conspiring always, both in exile. In 1867, Benito Montero was a corporal for the artillery battalion. He was executed for another military plan. By that action, Segundo Ruiz Belvis, Goico, and Ramón Emeterio Betances were exiled. Ramón Emeterio Betances and Segundo Ruiz Belvis. I'm going to talk a bit about Betances. He was a black revolutionary from Cabo Rojo. He was an abolitionist since he was a kid, basically. When he was a teenager, he made some money and paid for the freedom of enslaved people in his hometown church. He's buried in Cabo Rojo. We can go see his laying grounds, and it's pretty special. So he also was, when he got exiled after Grito de Lares, Jose Marti asked him to be the leader of promoting the Cuban independence struggle in Paris, in France. So also he had a very close relationship with the Cuban Revolution, and the Cuban Revolution also took some pointers from him. He was always conspiring to see how to get Puerto Rico free, how to get Cuba free, how to attack the ground in its own ground. He conspired in a few plots of trying to assassinate some generals or commanders in Spain. Some of them, most of them were unsuccessful, but he never quit. So Ruiz Belvis and Betances, they had already set up several juntas revolucionarias, like revolutionary committees throughout of Puerto Rico. They had made plans for an uprising together, and that uprising was to be in parallel of El Grito de Lares in Cuba, which happened, if I'm not mistaken, the 10th of October of 1868. So again, you see how they were continuously conspiring to attack at the same time. The Cuban independence movement and the Puerto Rican independence were supposed to happen vaguely at the same time, which is something that's rarely talking about. It's obviously mostly forgotten because Cuba is one of the ways of the future, and we're still stuck in the oldest colony in the world. So El Grito de Lares was to happen at the same time of El Grito de Lares, de Yara. El Grito de Lares is a municipality roughly in the center line, a little bit to the west of Puerto Rico. It's a seminal moment of our history, even though the state will never recognize it as such. There, every 23rd of September, there is big festivities in Lares of the whole independentista movement that we gather to commemorate that day, because it's the first time we proclaim the Puerto Rican Republic. So it's one of the most far-reaching moments of insurrection, that and the 1950s insurrection, which is the one that happens in the 30th of October, and that Francisco's going to talk about that later. So, in a word, colonialism was the main factor behind it. There's some details. I won't go deep in them because we're short of time. But having been exiled, Betances and Ruiz Belvis, they set out from New York. They were exiled in New York to carry out the plan. They went to Chile to start off. Betances went from Chile to the Dominican Republic, and Ruiz Belvis's plan was to gather support, international support in Chile, to recognize the newly founded Republic of Puerto Rico. Ruiz Belvis dies in a matter of days from getting to Chile. He didn't even get a chance to tell why he was there. It's tragic, It's a big blow, obviously, to everybody's morale. But still, Betances in Santo Domingo started, kept on organizing and trying to gather the support that the Free Belvis that you can imagine. Like, you're in the cusp of such an important moment that could define, and it would define the future of your nation, and your partner in crime dies. Super bad timing. So that's tragic. So just a parenthesis. El Grito de Lares is what starts off the 10-year war in Cuba that ends in 1878, and then kicks off again. The revolution kicks off again in 1895. I'll talk about that later. So yeah, he fell sick. His pelvis died, and then in Puerto Rico, we also have a streak of bad luck. Manuel González was the head of the Revolutionary Committee of Camuy. He was arrested. This happened the 22nd or 23rd of September of 1868, where he was arrested. The plans of the Grito de Lares and the Grito de Lares read like, this shouldn't happen after October, but everybody knew it had to happen in October sometimes. So this guy got arrested, and the Spanish get a hold of an outline of the plan of El Grito de Lares. So this makes everything go, rushed. It how do you say, precipitates the plan. And after that, the people from El Comité Revolucionario de Lares hear about it. They say, we got a mint out of the committees. That's a fun fact. The leader of the Lares committee was Venezuelan. And then he calls for this meeting, and nobody knows why, if it's because of bad communication or panic or fear, but only one other revolutionary committee gets to the meeting, which is the Mayagüez Revolutionary Committee. Mayagüez is one of the most westerly lying municipalities, and that one was led by a man from the United States. So they get there, they get going to the meeting, and they say, today is the day. We're gonna go out, we're gonna take over Lares. They're like 200. They get some machetes, they get some shotguns, or I don't know, muskets. I don't know what because they were back then, that they go take over Lares. A few squabbles here and there. It's not that much of an issue because they had a surprise factor, and they take the church. The father sings a Te Deum and in honor of the newly founded nationality. And right there and there, they proclaimed the first Puerto Rican Republic. Oh, and so it's the first time we're free. Just in Lares. But they go from Lares and they march. They say, we gotta keep the ball running. We gotta go to Pepino, which is now known as San Sebastián del Pepino. It's a municipality that is just right next to Lares, just to the west. They get to Pepino, but again, a rat told the Spanish military, because they wanted to assault the barracks that had a lot of arms so they can distribute to revolutionaries. So when they get there, they are overwhelmed because the military is already waiting for them at the defensive positions. And, the Grito de Lares sadly comes to an early end. People arrested, people deported. Obviously, Betances couldn't come back to Puerto Rico, so he also goes more into exile. And that is, it's a blow. It's one of those moments that we yearn for and we wish it might have went differently, but history goes as it goes. And yeah, after Lares, one of the center how do you say demands apart from independence was abolition, obviously, because Ramon Emeterio Betances was head. He was an abolitionist, as I told you earlier. So there's not everything was lost. You could say some victories came out of the Grito de Lares. In 1970, the government establishes the gradual abolition of slavery, and in 1873 it gets totally abolished. And this is definitely because these people went, and started shooting people, shooting the military in Lares. So armed struggle works, folks. So the struggle had to continue, right? The fervor was not depleted. It was a blow. But hey, in 1973, people kept trying. You had another frustrated attempt in Camuy in 1975. You have another, revolutionary attempt. Then in 1887, that one ended up being torture. But then we had a governor that lasted 9 months because he was sort of a butcher. He was called El General Palacios, I think. So in 1887, the participants that took part in one of the intended insurrections were tortured by a method called El Componte, which they will crush the fingers with wooden sticks, like you had your hand open, and until the finger broke, or until you spoil the beans, right? When the Spanish crown took notice of that, supposedly they said, "Oh no, this guy is too radical for our colonialism. Let's get rid of him." Obviously, tides were changing because 1887 was not a good moment for Spain at all, right? In 1895, another uprising was quelled in Yauco, exile and imprisonment as well. But now, I don't know if you want to get in there. Next part would be like to talk about a little bit of national contradictions. I don't know if Francisco wants to,
I think we can have that conversation and I can pick it up. if it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So good. Okay. Well, I know that you're all hearing right now, just in case again, but my name is Francisco. We're the other one that's talking in this podcast. When we when I was talking with Seba about how to structure, 200 years of history of Puerto Rican struggle, we try to do that differentiation, no, between the 19th century, the 20th century. But before I go into it, I want to make some clarifications in terms of the dynamic that at least I will be doing and where I will be putting the accents, just to be responsible with it and just to know, just give a better general understanding. First of all, in terms of national identity, or how I go into, or I will be going into, the national struggle, national identity around that struggle, because it will be an important factor in how different debates inside the Puerto Rican different factions strategized around the optimal goal of independence is in terms of Imagined Communities by Benedict Anderson. Like when I try to talk about nationalism, national phenomenon, and how it incorporates into different social struggles, that's my go-to in terms of theory, of national theory. The other thing that for me is important is to understand that the Puerto Rican struggle for independence is heterogeneous in its composition. And when I say that's heterogeneous in its composition, I mean in all due sense. Like there can be different correlations between, your positions in terms of economic preference, positions in terms of social preference, and your positions in terms of how you want to relate yourself with the empire. No, and it's something that inclusively for people that are hearing this, it surmounts to love the Caribbean. Like for me, I had a very good professor, Antonio Gastambide. He has a very good book on Tan lejos de Dios, so far from God. It comes from that quote comes from it's half a quote from a Mexican dictator, Porfirio Diaz. The quote is "Tan lejos de Dios y tan cerca de los Estados Unidos." So far from God and so close to the United States. And what he was trying to say, in terms of Caribbean general terms, I will accept to a Dominican Republic, but that's for another day. Is that one of the main political identities, or how the political landscape configurates in most of our countries in the Caribbean, is in terms of the relationship with the United States, more so even in general terms than the economic program. And what do I mean by this? That when we talk about the independence struggle in Puerto Rico, we're going to see pro-independence fighters that they could be far right inclusively, and we have pro-independence fighters that are left orientated, and everything in between, and it obviously that will be let's say the gravitation around those positions there will be a process of homogenization, let's say. It's still in debate in the 20th century, but it's very palpable in that process. And I think it's something that I've known that many people that try to understand Puerto Rican politics and Puerto Rican struggle tend to have a very difficult time analyzing it, because in Puerto Rico, when we talk about Puerto Rican politics and Puerto Rican struggle, we have sometimes two things going at the same time. Like the Puerto Rican parties here are right now, I will get to how they formed, but just to have a general sense, they are formed in a general sense based on the relationship with the United States. That's the most important thing. You have the Partido Nuevo Progresista, Puerto Rican New Progressive Party, New Progressive Party, sorry, which is pro-statehood, so pro-annexation with the United States, generally right-wing, in that sense, in terms of the economic platform. You have the Partido Popular Democrático, with the Popular Democratic Party, which has a very particular, let's say, evolution in the 20th century that I will get to. But in terms of right now and how it ended, it's a pro status quo, colonial status quo with the United States. No, that is its main goal in this moment. It was not its main goal when it was founded, but I'll get to that in a moment. The Puerto Rican pro-independence party, the PIP, which is an incision from the Popular Democratic Party. That's why I want to get to that in a moment, which, like the name says, it struggles for the independence of Puerto Rico. And we have other types of parties that are not, that when I mention them, I do not mention them necessarily electorally wise, because they don't have, in terms of principle in their program, to go to general elections. They either could have them in terms of tactics, or even have a position of no participation, no abstention as part of their political strategy. But they've all formed part of the Puerto Rican struggle, no? And I think that's very important to correlate, no? Another thing that for me, time wise, it would be impossible, like because of the relationship with the United States, there are very big, important Puerto Rican migrant communities in the United States, which also, bring with them, their political baggage and struggles. Maybe I will sometimes, talk a bit about John Lawrence Fallen, some stuff, but I know that I would be doing a disservice, like talking about the Puerto Rican migrant community in the United States, their struggles, their correlation with the Puerto Rican pro-independence movement. That's another program in and of itself. And I think that maybe the actors to talk about those experiences must be others too. No, I've never had the opportunity, or not the opportunity, but the situation to live in the United States in that sense. So there are certain experiences that I think there are plenty of people that can really, really talk about it. And I think it's important to talk about it, no? And so I want to say that I will be limited in that sense. I want to start a bit more back in terms of that when Seba was talking about the Puerto Rican struggle in 1868 and all that's happening in the 19th century. I think that it's important to also mention that this is all happening at the same time that there are multiple struggles in the Caribbean that have deep, deep correlations in terms of their objectives and their future, political future, in terms of what's the plan, specifically in the islands. I mean, when Seba was talking about the correlation between the Grito de Lares and the Grito de Lares and what's everything's up, is that because all of these fighters have communication between themselves. All of these fighters are continually talking. One of the focal points actually was in New York. There was a very, very big dynamic in terms of strategizing between different persons from different nationalities in New York and outside of New York, but that in one way or another really cemented the collaborations for the struggle of all of them. For example, when you talk about the Cuban Revolutionary Party, Partido Revolucionario Cubano of José Martí, which was founded in 1892. After the 10 Years War in Cuba ended, after the Little War ended, the first principle was to liberate Cuba and help the liberation of Puerto Rico. So what you're seeing is that when we see this correlation, what we're talking about is that they always saw these struggles as intertwined in terms of the necessity to have a united front against the empire. Because when Martí talks about this, he's not talking like, oh no, we want to be against Spain. No, what he's saying is that no, we have to be against Spain, but in this new multi-imperial world that was the one at the end of the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, we have to have a correlation of nations that can affront in the Caribbean other influences and other potential imperial invasions. That was what happened at the end of the day. So I think that's important to clarify. Even if you see the Puerto Rican flag, the present Puerto Rican flag, and you see the Cuban flag, you're like, what? This is like the same. Well, it's not a mere coincidence. The current Puerto Rican flag, which is the one that was created after the Lares flag, which is a bit different, was created by the Puerto Rican Auxiliary Committee in the Revolutionary Cuban Party. which had the task of coordinating help from Puerto Rico to the Cuban struggle for independence that started in 1895, and trying to one way or another create the perfect situation for a new pro-independence struggle in Puerto Rico. Mind you, the people that were inside these struggles, as well as in the Cuban side, there were people that were pro-independence on respect of Spain, or in respect to Spain, sorry, but we're very, very pro-annexation in respect to the United States. And it has to do with the roles that we're seeing. In that moment, one element that's important, in Puerto Rico specifically, I don't know more in the Cuban side, but for example, many of the tendencies in terms of the first manifestations of worker struggle in Puerto Rico, and I'll do an asterisk, worker struggle in terms of free workers, because there were slavery revolts since the beginning of imperialism in Puerto Rico, with more or less intensity after the Haitian Revolution. There were constant cimarronage, cimarronaje, I don't know how to say it in English, I don't know if it's the same concept, of people fleeing to liberated Hispaniola when Haiti had both sides, or Haiti invaded the other side to end slavery. That's a thing in itself. That's why I say that the Haiti Dominican thing is very particular in their situation, no?
Yeah, absolutely. We would say in the U.S., people will say marinage sometimes, or just maroon. But yeah, same
Maroon.
concept. Yeah.
So there were maroon struggles in Puerto Rico in all those processes up till the liberation of slaves. Then we're going to say something, Seba.
You were talking about Puerto Rico and Cuba. I just wanted to share, like, Jose Marti established his party in 1892, and I wanted to share that stanza from El Poema de Lola Rodríguez de Tio. Lola Rodríguez de Tio was one of our biggest poets in Puerto Rico. She's an independence struggle, mythical woman, right? And this stanza is one of, like, something that you carry around. If you were born into an independentista family, you carry around since, like, you're like 5 years old. You're like, oh, that image. So it goes, Cuba and Puerto Rico are as two wings of the same bird. They receive flowers and bullets into the same heart. So there's a really deep connection. That's the only interruption I wanted to make. Francisco, take it.
Yeah, so like taking it from where Seba left it, there is a profound relationship with the Cuban struggle, and we will see it also in the 20th century, actually. But there is also a profound relationship with struggles in general in the Caribbean. Like Seba said, the hacienda from which the Puerto Rican revolutionaries started out in Lares was for Venezuelan proprietor, and he participated and was put in prison because of that activism. And we would see a very, very close relationship between Betances and Gregorio Luperón and the Restoration War against Spain in the Dominican Republic. So what we see is a very, very big correlation between the different struggles in the Caribbean in a general sense against imperialism. First against Spain, then we will see a rearticulation against the United States. I think that's a very good book for people that I don't know if it's in English, but there's a very good book that's called Memorias de Bernardo Vega. It's edited by Cesar Andreu Iglesia, but Bernardo Vega was a very important worker. How do you say? Syndicalized worker that struggled. No, he was un tabaquero. He rolled tobacco, and tobacco rollers in the Caribbean in general sense were very, very it had a lot of initiative in activism because of the general situation in the workplace. First of all, because obviously they made a high demand product, and it's highly manual, so replacing it with machine is very difficult even today. And the other thing is that they had someone called the lecturer. That's when they were doing tobacco, where they were rolling tobacco, they would have this person that would read them occurrences in the day, so they would not get bored. And so there was a very big democratic work in terms of deciding what was going to be read. And many of the sometimes biggest socialist work coming from Europe and many socialist influence, anarchist influences, the influence in the Caribbean came in big part because of those dynamics where people that generally did not have the ability to read could hear these ideas, no, from a person that would read and that they would pay them, because the bourgeois did not pay the reader to read to the workers. No, they would pay the reader, and they would fight for the reader to stay there, no, and read them what they wanted to be read. In terms of the initial, no, starting the 20th century, one of the, and I'm going a little fumble, but for me it's important. One of the most important readers was a woman activist, Luisa Capetillo, which was anarchist, and she was one of the first persons, at least in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, for sure in Puerto Rico, not only that wore pants as a form of protest against no machismo and the patriarchy, but also for free love and for general, would you say, workplace welfare. And she showed workers how to read. She was a very important activist in those first times. So going to the 20th century, important things, just to round it up, like Seba said, no, in 1897 there was some more activism, but in the general sense, since there was a war, no, the Hispano-Cuban War that started in 1895, and the Cubans were winning in a general sense. So this is happening at the same time that the United States, no, is starting to have a very, very big interest in establishing maritime imperial control in general, no? And this is the term of the, I mean, you could see it with the Manifiesto to the West and all that, but there's a book by a general, I always forget, but that said that no, maritime power is at the end of the day, the biggest power in terms of imperial control. And the British knew that too. So the United States started to really, really have an interest in creating that maritime power, establishing the general elements to control at least its zone of influence, or what they thought was their zone of influence, no? And that's the Caribbean in the general sense, no? Latin America in the general, in a bigger sense, but the Caribbean specifically, with the Panama Canal and with the islands as part of that scheme, no? And so they decided to enter by obviously lying, like they always do. So it happened in Iraq and happened in other wars, but they lied. They said that the main exploded because of a Spanish strike in the Havana harbor, and it was an auto explode. They exploded their own boat and they let the mariners die, you know. So it was, we've seen it before, you know what we're talking about. So yeah. And so the United States declared war on Spain, no, as part of that proxy war in a sense, no. And as part of that war, they decided to go along with their plans, and they invaded Puerto Rico and the Philippines and Guam in the Pacific. So it's important to understand also that when the U.S. goes into this war, they're not looking exclusively to the Caribbean. They're also looking to get a foothold in the Pacific as part of their overall initiative to expand their imperial influence.
Frank, can I jump in there real quick? I just wanted to give the context of the reconcentration movement in Cuba. So the Cubans were at war in the revolution, and it was not an easy war. They were fighting against one of the most horrible human beings like you can think of, called Whaler. He came from Spain. He took over from another general that was the one that made the agreements to pacify the first 10-year war. And this guy, well, he didn't get the job done, right? And they put Whaler in charge, and this guy made a plan called the reconcentration. So he basically wanted to put all the peasants into the cities guarded by the Spanish military. So Cuba was mostly an agricultural country, and you suddenly have hundreds of thousands of people get into cities which they didn't fit in without any sign of possibility of having a decent like access to water, food, etc. There's estimates like maybe at least 200,000 Cubans died in the concentration camps in a span of 2 years. That's 10% of the population. This was because he didn't want the peasants to supply the revolutionaries with provisions. Nevertheless, the revolutionaries were winning, and later he had to step down, and the Queen Maria Cristina conceded autonomy to Puerto Rico and to Cuba in 1897 because they were the only two remaining basically colonies in the Caribbean by that time, and they didn't want to lose them forever. But yeah, that's then when the main happens. And another fun fact, and then I'll give it to you again, Francisco, is that because of the main, you already had a plan established in the government in Cuba to send a military envoy that had bought some weapons. He had ordered some weapons from a weapons manufacturers in the United States to go to Puerto Rico and finish, the liberation job. Because in the Paris Treaty, Cuba was awarded sovereignty, but not really Puerto Rico, So then when the main happened, you have politicians from the United States apply pressure to the deputy that was supposed to be in charge of that operation. And he told them, no, we're going to have to cancel your arms order. Just don't leave Puerto Rico alone, So this was months prior to the invasion of Puerto Rico in the military sense of the United States. And, they never got here. And then in the 12th of May, the United States Navy started bombarding San Juan. Francisco, if you want to.
Yeah, I would just add that for another example of how deep was the Antillean solidarity in that war is that the main general leading the Cuban Free Forces was Máximo Gomez, which is a Dominican. And one of the generals was Juan Dios Rivera, which is a Puerto Rican. And in the rank and file, there were people from all the islands, putting their blood, to liberate Cuba, because there was the idea that that after the liberation of Cuba, there will be a process in the rest of the islands. And it helps you to understand why when the Cuban Revolution triumphs in 1959, that idea for the Caribbean, in a general sense also, that was brought by that process. Because it's something that was forced much more before by Jose Marti, but also not only him, but all the revolutionaries in that historical time frame. So the United States starts the war. 1898 ends the war, and as our as a byproduct of that, the Treaty of Paris is signed. Cuba is granted sovereignty, but there's a catch. There's the Platt Amendment, which states that the United States can invade Cuba in any moment in that process, and it will stay for 20 years. So it will be a factor, a very important factor in terms of the Cuban process in the 20th century. And the United States stays with various of its colonies, specifically the Philippines, Guam, Samoa, and Puerto Rico.
You could say the Platt Amendment was like an embryo of neocolonialism. It's insane. That's it's literally they are directing from abroad the Cuban economy. It's insane. And it's still not even 1900.
Yeah, and so, but it just showcases what the necessities of U.S. capitalism in that moment, how it was looking to expand in a moment where many of the classical, let's say old European imperialism were already in their struggles. Lenin talks about that too, in more in the 20th century. But you could just see how everything is just little by little unfolding, and how the spheres of influences are sketching up in preparation to what will be the 20th century that we know today. No, so another important thing that we must understand is the role that Spain formed and the appreciation in Puerto Rico about Spain that helped to establish, let's say after the U.S. victory, very much easier control by the United States in the island. You must remember, like Seba said, there were very, very harsh governors that mistreated Puerto Ricans in general sense. There were very harsh repression. And in that moment also, we're talking about a moment where the Russian Revolution has not yet triumphed, or there's still a process of, let's say, generalization of socialist ideas in a general sense, Marxist ideas in a more profound sense, that people saw the United States in terms of liberalism, in terms of those elements, as something that is more progressive than what they had in that moment in terms of freedom of expression. You would see, and there was certain struggles against the U.S. in Puerto Rico when the U.S. arrived, but obviously after the war ended, there was a moment where there were still some struggles, but the United States affirmed control by the end of the century. I will not get into the specifics because I think that we have a time element, but there was a struggle, but it really by 1900 there was a very, very specific control, military control. The first 3 years of U.S. control was military. One important factor is that there was from the beginning there was a very big impulse to try to end that military rule and try to establish Puerto Rican sovereignty. One of the biggest, let's say, 19th century persons, Puerto Rican activist Eugenio María de Hostos, came to Puerto Rico to try to manage the situation in favor of. He was more of a liberal type of guy, so he was not like Betances. That when Betances knew about it, he said, "Well, why are Puerto Ricans fighting? Let's do this now." He was more of a mediator. He was like, "No, let's make a Patriot League. In the Patriot League, we will have all the options, and the Puerto Ricans decide because that's the democratic way, and the decision must be respected by the United States." So he was very positivistic in the, let's say, the judicial and the academic sense. He was, in my opinion, a bit how to say, ingenuo, naive is the word. He was a bit naive in how the thing really operated. Obviously, that naiveness came to an end very fast. But there was that element. So just so you have an idea, when the war ended, the auxiliary committee of the Cuban Revolutionary Party, that was the one coordinating the efforts in Cuba for Puerto Rico and the independence of Puerto Rico, Julio Hena, he was pro annexation with the United States. So that's why when I tell you it's a very difficult how it started to merge and what happened afterwards, and it's because you have these elements that against Spain were very, very competitive, but when it's about the United States, national economic element too, of free market in terms against Spain's backwardness, let's say, and all those elements. And I don't say this because I am, let's say, in accordance or I like what they thought. I do not like what they thought. I'm just trying to say what they were thinking in that moment that gave way to those decisions. So when the U.S. another element when the U.S. arrived in terms of class structure is that in many senses there was in that moment a big correlation between sectors that were more pro-autonomy or pro-independence with productive sectors in terms of I don't know if the word is capitalist in the strict sense, but people that had land and had economic means, vis-a-vis workers, that only had their ability to create riches, in that sense, And that is important to understand how the pro-independence struggle had a very, very hard time in the first 20 to 30 years after the United States came, because in terms of the workers, there was very big qualitative advances in general terms. And now I have to be very thankful. No, the United States entered, and afterwards, for the first time, but in Spain ruled, it was completely illegal. The first Federation of Workers of Labor, let's say labor organization, was created. Which was the Regional Federation of Workers, 1898, if I'm not incorrect. Yes. Afterwards, that federation, 1899, splits, and the Free Federation of Workers is created. Now, there's a catch. The principal figure is a Spaniard, Santiago Iglesias Pantin, which is known as the father of the Puerto Rican labor movement. He was more of a narco-syndicalist tendency at the beginning, but he was arrested by Spain, so he had a very, very vigorous, dynamic against anything that was Spaniard. And he, in his late life, which it was when he was doing all this, he allied with the American Federation of Labor with Samuel Gompers. So what we're talking about is that he allied with the conservative side of let's say labor struggle in the United States, no, and that had a direct effect in Puerto Rico in how labor. And when I say labor, I'm talking about workers. I think workers is a better term. Workers organized in labor, no, let's say it like that, reacted to the U.S. president in Puerto Rico in those years. So we have things that are going in parallel. We have labor movement that's getting bigger and more stronger every day in comparison to 20, 30 years ago. But at the same time, there's a imperialist and market penetration in Puerto Rico that is giving out or it's doing all it has to do to create, what Marx called the originary translation of capital to their capital. No, so in terms of when Spain was there, coffee was the main mono exporter. Puerto Rico had a mono exporting agricultural economy, be it with Spain, afterward with the United States. What changed was what they were exporting. So they started to move to sugar, and that had a very, very important effect not only on the worker movement, how we identify inclusively as Puerto Ricans in the 20th century and forward. No,
Can I jump in real quick just to lay a bit more ground on the contradictions of that transition from pre-war, post-war, that I think will add to the point you're making. So yeah, the workers were basically really abandoned in Puerto Rico before the United States colonized us. But there was also like an agricultural class made of there were a lot of small proprietors of farms scattered around the island, mostly exporting coffee as well. And they, out of all the farmland in Puerto Rico in 1897, they owned 91% of it. And it was, thousands of small farms. The immediate consequences of the invasion were that the United States devalued the national currency 40%. They suspended credits for the agricultural farmers, and they closed our routes of exportations, and basically we could only sell coffee to the United States. Coffee was, I think, like 41% of our exports. And the United States didn't even consume that much coffee down there. And on top of that, Hurricane Siriaco in 1899, after the coffee being plummeted in price like 40%, it made landfall like a category 4, just like Maria, in 1899, and it destroyed like a lot of people's farms. So there was also a hot sale of Puerto Rican land that got acquired by trusts, by sugar trusts, by the monopolies from the state. So that's also something that I think can solidify that notion of the original accumulation, originary accumulation of the states when they colonize us. Sorry, Francisco, you can.
No, it's okay. Like in general terms, there was a direct policy by the United States to extract capital from the Puerto Rican land class, and agriculture, let's say, little proprietors, etc., as to create the big central sugar centrals. That's a direct translation. Sugar plantains, for mono extractivism to the United States. So that was the let's say the economic plan in the short term. Meanwhile, while this is happening, there is in those years there was a big push by certain, let's say, I like to call it, well, I don't know if this is possible, but liberal in the U.S. sense, colonial liberal. It's like, no, they are Occidental, they speak Spanish, that's a Roman language. Let's try to assimilate them. Well, assimilate them was, only teach English in the schools. Only, or you have to swear allegiance to the flag, or you go to jail. Or you can't have the Puerto Rican flag anywhere, or you go to jail. So there was also a systematic, let's say, soft oppression. That was not soft, but in comparison to disappearing people. That's why I'm trying to do the correlation. No, it was a very more schematic oppression against freedom of expression, in a general sense, that also mediated to having or led to very, very deep, profound discussions and debates about what means to be a Puerto Rican in the 20s and the 30s. No, because it has to do with a language. It's all those elements. And also I have to say that after the Free Federation of Labor was formed, they created a party, the Socialist Party of 1899, which, like I said, mind you, was pro-statehood, was pro-annexation with the United States. So that's why I say that there was a very deep or complicated situation in terms of pro-independence fighters or pro-independence struggle when the United States arrived, because we had a dichotomy where free producers and limited, let's say, plantain owners were tended to be more pro-autonomy, more pro-independence, but in terms of the general workforce and inclusively the party that was created by the workers were much more assimilated to pro statehood option or pro United States in that sense. That changed over time for a variety of reasons. You have, like, there's a very good book, actually. I'm going to show it here. It's in Spanish though. Lucha Obrera en Puerto Rico de Ángel Quintero. It's a very good anthology of historic documents from the Puerto Rican labor movement, if you ever want to or have interest in that. One of the documents is the acts of the fourth convention, annual convention of the Socialist Party in 1919, and there's a very, very big debate between the Santiago Pantin, which was pro-statehood, and Manuel Rojas, which was pro-independence, and the pro-independence faction lost in that struggle, in that dynamic. But just what I wanted to show is that it was not homogeneous, in that sense that there were elements that were struggling. Luisa Capetillo, which I mentioned earlier, was pro-independent. So it's something that is like a bit of a struggle in that sense. While this is happening, we also have very important, let's say, advances, in a bad sense, in U.S. law around colonialism. And so one element I think it's important to talk about when we talk about the Puerto Rican experience and its relationship with the United States is how that relationship also has influenced how the United States sees itself as a country. And when I say sees itself, I'm not talking homogeneously inside the United States, because I know that's very heterogeneous, a lot of people struggling. But in terms of, let's say, the liberal and let's say the political status quo, liberal, Ivy League, that type, that gave way to, if the United States was created by a war against colonialism, and we pride ourselves as being free world. Obviously, they pride themselves being free world while having slaves, killing, first originators, or expropriating their land, but that's the contradiction. But let's say that let's play the game. Let's play that mind game. In their sense, like, yeah, we're free, except for all the other things we've done, but we're free. How are we, as a free country, going to have territories? Are they going to vote? Are they going to have a vote in Congress? Evidently, we do not want that because we are racist. But what are we going to do? And so that gave way to the famous insular cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. Puerto Rico Steamship Company. There's like 5 or 6, and there's one very important one in 1922. The gist of it, in resume, what the United States says is very important. It's that we can have, first of all, we can have territories. That we can do that. Second of all, sovereignty of those territories fall under Congress. So they don't fall on the people. So the territories don't have sovereignty, or don't have inclusively, like the states, residual sovereignty in a legal sense, like the states in the U.S. have. No, they don't have no sovereignty. The only sovereignty is Congress, and they give or take as Congress sees fit. Okay. And so, in that sense, those territories are owned by, but are not part of the United States. So the Constitution does not go with the flag, or does not accompany the flag. It's not in the baggage. So the 14th Amendment and all those individual elements of the Bill of Rights are not put there. There have been decisions that say, well, maybe, yeah, but at the end of the day, the gist of it, that's the interpretation the U.S. does in terms of their territories. And I think that's very important, because the U.S. has not tried at the moment to expand in that sense. But I mean, the one that's right now have obviously, it feels very inclined to do it. So that is right now the judicial structure that operates on U.S. territories. And we are not the only territory. U.S. Virgin Islands, U.S. American Samoa, Guam. So there are various, and I think it's important, because it was that the situation in Puerto Rico gave way to these elements, in terms of how the U.S. Legally operates on U.S. territories in general. So this happened in those first 20 years.
And talking about that example, even the Zionist entity, uses the Puerto Rico colonial structure as an example of how to deal with the West Bank. That's another conversation that, it goes over all the way to that pariah state. It's crazy.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly, like, I appreciate you both kind of bringing that up and talking about it too, because like there's a similar thing that happens with the Portuguese Empire towards the end, where like Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde and Angola, Mozambique, right? They're they're not considered, well, the Portuguese don't consider them colonies, right? They basically say that no, they're part of Portugal, right? But like obviously to the people, they're colonized, right? And so then there's independent struggles that then eventually, and really there has to be a revolution in Portugal even before like the revolution continues within, those colonial, those people resisting colonialism as well. But it's a good point about the United States, in terms of these, like, I know Puerto Rico is still within the UN, right? You all are still a part of like not part of the colonial.
Hey, fun fact. We're not in the list of territories to decolonize in the UN, because in the 20th century, in the 50s, you're going to a front, man. I still have not gotten there. I'm kidding. But the UN got us out.
Yeah, we're way before the existence of the UN, anyways. But yeah, continue on. Anyways, I appreciate the point you're making. Yeah.
But people got angry. People got angry when that happened. Francisco tell you all about it.
Yeah. People got very angry. So. And it's also in having the conversation with you. It's different from, for example, I mean, because imperialism is imperialism, so it's different in legally wise. Example for the French experience, where they, like in Nigeria, they did the Department d'Outre-mer, which still exists today in the Caribbean. Actually, there are departments of Outre-mer. MSSR is from Martinique, necessary from Falun Gong right now from Department of the America. But in terms of Algeria, it was, you were all citizens, but you have to learn French first. And now, 90% of Algeria did not know French, so you basically established, an apartheid regime there. That's part of the reason why Algeria had their war of struggle, no? Or one of the things that precipitated it. No? So in that sense, in Puerto Rico in 1912, in 1900s, they passed the Forker Law, which established a civil government where the governor was appointed by the United States. That would not change up until 1952. We'll get to that in a moment. Afterwards, in 1912, they established the Jones Act, which established U.S. citizenship to Puerto Ricans, or imposed it, because there was a Puerto Rican citizenship, but they especially said how the law was formatted was, if you negate the U.S. citizenship, you become a pariah. You can't have access to credit. You can't have access to anything. So there's a residual Puerto Rican citizenship, but it really does not exist in that sense, no. And the reason why they did the Jones Act and they established the U.S. citizenship was for the draft. That's the real big reason, no, because like I said, the U.S. Constitution does not travel to the territory. So even if you were a U.S. citizen in a territory, you can't vote, for example, for the president of the United States or have elected persons elected in Congress, because that's a right reserved to states. That's not a right reserved to one as a person specifically, no, in terms of Puerto Rico in that sense. Curiously enough, if you live in a U.S. base in the other part of the world, you can't vote for president. I mean, I don't really want to vote for president. I don't really care. I care, but I'm not interested. I have my own struggles, but you get what I mean? Like, that's the dynamic in a sense. That same year, the first Puerto Rican Independence Party was created, which is different from the one we have now. It's the Partido de la Independencia, created by José Santiago Cintrón and Eugenio Benítez Castaño, which, like I said, there was a process of let's say, changing dynamic. Why? Because obviously, that the workers, they have to work, and if the situation in the workplace is hostile, then you will be insatisfied, and those things raise questions. Raise very, very important questions that give way, to struggle. In 1913, the Partido Unión is formed, or one of the persons that formed it was pro-independence. I think it's, when you look back at it, I think it's nominally pro-independence. Like, I'm gonna put pro-independence in my principles, but they really did not much, in my opinion. Like, there's a very big debate about José de Diego, and I think it's important to talk about José de Diego as an example of the contradictions of that process in that moment, because José de Diego, on one hand, was a very big advocate for Spanish and for Puerto Rican identity identified and correlated to Spain, to his Hispanicy, let's say, to this great family of Latin America that has a very, a Quixote hereditary culture that's important to preserve. That he articulated in that way. But at the same time, he was the lawyer of the sugarcane central companies that advocated against more worker rights. So he was the principal figure of pro-independence. And so that's the thing. We have people that are pro-independence, but have in identity-wise, in terms of the ability to decide in our own territory, but in terms of the plan, of the project, of what we want after independence, we're very conservative in their notion. So it, in my opinion, alienated a lot of people in the workplace, in that specific moment in history. While this is all happening, there's another party that is created, which is the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, which will play an important role in the 30s. It was created in the 20s as a very, we call it one of the first, let's say, high learning institutions in Puerto Rico is called Ateneo. And so we call it like Independentista Ateneo, like pro-independence fighter, but from Ateneo. What we try to say when we say that is that it's very conservative, very limited. No, that will change, but I will get to that in a moment. While this is all happening, I have to say, one other of the elements that was important to the United States when invading Puerto Rico, was to create Puerto Rico as a military outpost in the Caribbean, as part of its general dynamic in protecting the Panama Canal. So from 1924 onwards, we see that, in its peak, at least 25% of Puerto Rican land was U.S. military land, U.S. military bases. And it's still, at least a big chunk is still there. So in 1924 was when they first started the big bases in Puerto Rico, that they started to enter in Puerto Rico as a country. It's not one island, one inhabited island. It's 3 habitated islands: Puerto Rico, Culebra, and Vieques. And part of that process was to create bases in Culebra and Vieques, which are important to understand certain struggles in the 20th century. So that started to happen right in that moment. In the 30s, there was a very important moment, starting in 1930 exactly, which is when this figure, which is called Pedro Albizu Campos, comes into the presidency of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party that I talked about. Curiously enough, Pedro Albizu Campos served in the National Guard. He was drafted because of the U.S. citizenship. He was I believe the word is orphan, because he knew his mother, but he was black. He was born in very, very hostile, marginalized situation in a southern city called Ponce. The person that gave him, and here's how the contradictions sometimes round out, the person that gave him money to start his educational preparatory was Jose de Diego, the right wing one, pro-independence advocate. He then studied in Harvard chemistry. While in Harvard, he had very, very close relationships with the pro-independence movement of Ireland, and he actually participated in debates for the independence of Ireland. And he came back to Puerto Rico, and he came to be president of the Nationalist Party. Why is this important? Because of the shift in the independence struggle from that moment on. Many people talked about him because he was very conservative in certain aspects, very, very left-wing leaning, inclusively. In other aspects, he's a very, let's say, the word is not controversial, but very complicated figure in terms of political program. But what is not complicated about him, and I think that in the independence movement we all very agree, that we talk about him as the conscience of the Puerto Rican pro-independence conscience. And he is very important because before him, in terms of the struggle against the United States, the independence movement was very much, let's say, embedded in dialogue, in maybe mediating, trying to advance, but in a mediated way. Let's see what the Americans want. Let's see how can we do this without, not confronting them directly. Well, Pedro Albizu Campos, when they were celebrating the 4th of July, in a pedestal that was created in Old San Juan, by the Puerto Rican Nationalist Parties, they had pro-independence flags. I'm sorry, pro U.S. flags, actually, like little U.S. flags in the podium. And mind you, this was the podium that the Nationalist Party created for Pedro Albizu Campos to talk. So they themselves saw it like, okay, we're going to have a commemoration of another country that celebrated its independence. So all good. And he goes to the podium and he starts to take all the pro statehood U.S. flags out of the podium and puts them aside. And he starts his discourse saying, United States, I do not salute you, because if in other countries you are the symbol of freedom, in my country you are a symbol of repression. And I think that's a very, very important moment in terms of the independence struggle, because it created, or it reopened, as it was with Spain, the possibility to have a pro-independence struggle that was completely confrontational with the empire, with the colonial rule in the country. And that's why, in my opinion, Albizu Campos is very important in the Puerto Rican pro-independence, let's say, people. And why many people, you see many pictures of him, many people with shirts of him, because he was the first one in terms of this century that said, no, is that we're not going to negotiate anymore. We want it, we want this now, and we'll do anything necessary to get there. And so that marked an important moment. This is happening at the same time that the Free Federation of Labor is starting to have, let's say, incisions inside its structuring body because it's very compliant with the bourgeoisie in Puerto Rico. And so, like I said before, he starts in 1930. At the same time that this is happening, actually, the Puerto Rican Communist Party is founded, and it will have an important role a little bit going forward. But like I said, there's a process in which workers are looking for other options beside the Puerto Rican Socialist Party that's pro-statehood. There's starting to be a mounting struggles in terms of big strikes that are not necessarily strikes with which the labor union in that moment, the Free Federation of Labor, is comfortable with. And so it will create an insatisfaction inside the unionized workforce. That will lead to a very important moment in 1934 with the general sugarcane strike. And that general sugarcane strike is what catapulted Albizu Campos and made him very, let's say, conceive an important threat to the United States, because in one moment, that strike, when it was created, it was a wildcat strike. The Free Federation of Labor negotiated behind the workers a new collective agreement for the totality of the sugarcane plants in Puerto Rico, which amounts for a very, in that moment in history, more than 30% of the workforce was there, so it was a very important part of the workforce. And so they started to strike. And since they did not have a clear leader, because the leaders, or the person that were supposed to be leader, betrayed them, then they looked to Albizu Campos. And so they gave Albizu Campos a lot of leadership in that process. It had a mixed end, because they did have a certain advancement, but the Nationalist Party did not have the ability, or that's how historians see it in a sense, to fully tap into those elements of worker struggle, because the political plan of the Nationalist Party in Puerto Rico did not respond necessarily to worker struggle. It was more, I will not say petit bourgeois in the sense that we understand it, but more like Seba said, like going back to those small agricultural plots and small agricultural production. So there was, like I said, in the contradictions of this struggle, there was a cross of what might have happened, but that did not happen because of different class positions in the struggle for independence. No, notwithstanding, it really, really marked an important moment in Puerto Rican history, so much. And I'll make a brief moment, but I think it's important to say it in any historical process. In 1935 was the first time that women in Puerto Rico could vote. 1921 for women that could read, but 1935 was the universal suffrage. I think it's important to mention it because obviously after that, women start participating also in electoral processes, but also because they are an important actor in this process. Another important element that brings Albizu Campos and will have a profound impact on the rest of the struggle in the 20th century is that he also brings two things. He also brings to the table a legal argument, saying that we deserve independence because before the Treaty of Paris in 1897, we had an autonomy. Spain granted us an autonomy that had a residual sovereignty, and legally you could not do what you were doing. No, obviously the world does not move legally. We can see that in the genocide of Palestine. Not so but I mean, it was a noble argument in that moment, and it was important because it led him to also argue, since we do not have to legally do this because they are illegal here, we can confront them, and since we can confront them, we cannot abide by their processes. And so since we cannot abide by their processes, our position by principle is abstention in general elections. So that is important because up to this day, there are sectors in the pro-independence movement that have that position, no? And you will see it constantly. That debate, you will see it constantly in the Puerto Rican struggle for independence between different actors. It's like circular. I have my opinion about that. You'll see it as we go on, but it's important because it brings very, very novel political positions that shape how different sectors in the Puerto Rican independence movement interact with the United States. After that strike, in 24 of October 1935, there was the Rio Piedras massacre. Because, like I said, if your position is, or here's how the National Party see it, we don't do elections, so how do we do political change? Well, we fight. And so there was a general sense that we were preparing for that moment. And the United States saw it too. And so they were also looking for a way to try to provoke, let's say, the Nationalist Party. So they did the Rio Piedras massacre. And they did the Rio Piedras massacre because while they were the strike, Bisu Campos made a declaration saying, if any of our people die, if you kill any of these workers, the government will die. And if you kill any of the Nationalist Party, the chief of police will die. I mean, he said it openly. And they killed two of the Nationalist Party. And afterwards, in the February 23, 1936, two Nationalist Party activists killed Colonel Riggs. Because in how do you say represalia, in response to that massacre. And the two militants, I would say heroes inclusively, were taken alive, and they were executed on the spot without due process, because the due process is selective, While all this is happening, there is a general crisis of hegemony in the colony. There's a lot of parties that really are not grounding. Even the pro-independence party, Partido Unión, they're really not. The general sense was that it was corrupt. Everyone was corrupt. Everyone was just trying to live off the colony. And this is important because while this augmented struggle is happening, there are processes in which, in 1936 specifically, two very important organizations start to act more affirmatively. While this is happening, the Communist Party is organizing workers, and this goes to the organization of the drivers. I don't know if it was only bus drivers, but drivers in the narrow, so taxi drivers, etc. This organization is crucial because it will be the organization that will try to actively aggregate other unions that are leaving the Free Federation of Labor after they felt betrayed by the 1934 strike. And they start creating this new center, Central General de Trabajadores, this new Conference of Labor that has been the peak in Puerto Rican organized labor. While this is also happening in 1936, the Puerto Rican Liberal Party is dissolved, and they create Social Independence Action. And why is this important? Because one of the main actors in Social Independence Action is a person called Luis Muñoz Marín, which will be key in what happens afterwards. And this Social Independence Action start talking with the Communist Party and with the CGT, and they start creating something, a new party, which will be called the Partido Popular Democrático, which was created in 1938 by word of the Muñoz Marín. His experience in that moment, 90% of that party was pro-independence. So even if you see the logo of that party, it's Jíbaro. Jíbaro is a agricultural worker. From the side, Partido Popular Democrático, Popular Democratic Party, those are names that look left-wing, the motto was Pan, Tierra, Libertad, bread, freedom, and land. Very similar to bread, freedom, and peace from the Russian, the Ursch Revolution of 1917, because there was a direct influence. No, the Communist Party, and there were left-wing sectors that were actively organizing around this new party. And this coincides with the total repression against the Nationalist Party, because after the Riggs assassination, the U.S. moves to arrest the totality of the leadership of the Nationalist Party in what is called in the classical one, threat of sedition. In the U.S. they want to arrest someone for and they don't have nothing, threat of sedition. That's always as a historical fact. It was by jury, and in the first jury elected, there were Puerto Ricans, and Albizu Campos was innocent. The jury decided he was not guilty. In the second jury, it was all white U.S. Citizens, and he was convicted. No, so the U.S. was very, very agile and very fast in completely eliminating from political circulation, the leadership of the Nationalist Party, and that also maybe in a sense facilitated that these new people that were going around the Popular Democratic Party could have a lot more space to grow as an option. At the same time that the Secretaría General de Trabajadores, the Worker Central, was also growing. At the end of the day, one other element that's important to talk about in repression was the biggest massacre that has occurred in Puerto Rico, which was the 21st of March of 1937, which is the Ponce Massacre. That was when the Nationalist Party in Domingo de Ramos, or how do you say that in English? Sunday of it's a liturgy Catholic holiday, the Sunday of Ascension. No, that Sunday before the Ascension, when he arrives, and there's
we call it Palm Sunday, I think.
Palm Sunday, yeah, exactly. Domingo de Ramos,
the Sunday before
yes,
Easter, right?
Yes. So the Nationalist Party made a protest in Ponce, and they shot at the protest, and so at least 30 people were dead, including a little girl. So there was a generalized repression against the Nationalist Party at the end.
And the protest was directly linked to the imprisonment of the Nationalist Party movements. Like, they were basically protesting because they were in prison. So that's a good fact to know.
Yeah. So the PPD, I'll say PPD, Popular Democratic Party, PPD, wins in the 40s. And it's important to understand this because when they win under idea of reformism, and I'm not saying necessarily in a bad or good sense, but their platform was reformism. We are pro-independence, but we want to start attacking certain issues in Puerto Rico in that moment. Just to have an understanding, in that moment, Puerto Rico was the poorest territory in the Caribbean in a general sense, in terms of health. The place where more women died at birth, the place where more little children died before 10 years. So the general situation in material-wise was very, very, very difficult. And so they started a series of policies very popular with the Roosevelt line of New Deal. In case of Puerto Rico, was Operación Manos a la Obra, where basically they did a series of reforms, first as of industrialization by substitution, then by invitation. But in the sense, there was a very, very big capital injection in Puerto Rico in a general sense. Obviously, one of the things they are trying, the U.S. is trying to do, is circumvent the political animosity against the rule in the island. I mean, come on, it's not only that we want to. In terms of the U.S., they were very, very interested in seeing an option out where they had control over the island, and they found it in Muñoz Marín, actually. While this is happening in 1941, Marín starts to, let's say, 1940, manos a la obra. They start to economically, inject capital in Puerto Rico, so there's a lot more money, a lot more work, etc. At the same time, in 1941, it starts the massive expulsion of people from Vieques. Like I said before, one of the islands that is inhabited is Vieques. The United States wanted to use Vieques as an experimental zone for ballistic experiment, And so they imagine the island is like this, and they crushed everyone in the middle. And so the other two, on the left is a depot, an arms depot, and on the right they just bombarded it, and then continue bombarding it for the rest of the 20th century. And this obviously created a very, very big resentment in certain people in the PPD, because there are communists there, there are left-wing leaning people there. Obviously, there are people that do not want this. So they started to create a place called Congreso Pro Independencia, because while this is all happening, Muñoz Marín is saying, no, we will leave the status for later. No, we don't. We're doing some things here. We want to better the economy in the country. So when we have independence, we have something to stand on. So we will leave the status for later. And he started with that, that game, let's say. So in 1943, the Pro-Independence Congress is established because they wanted to pressure Muñoz Marín to create independence. While this is happening in 1944, one of the biggest battleworks of the PPD inside dissolves voluntarily, which is the Communist Party. The Communist Party in 1944 decides to dissolve in the context of the Popular Front against Nazi Germany. And there is historical debate if Moscow ordered it directly or not. I will leave it there, But the thing is that they dissolved in a moment when they were having a very big influence in the Central Workers Union and in the government. So I'll leave it to you to speculation.
I'll just say quickly. I mean, it's interesting to hear that perspective too, because this is also a very contentious period, within how we think about CPUSA, as well, with the abandoning of the Black Belt thesis in this period, and the abandoning of the idea really of Black national self-determination, struggle for a popular front strategy, and again, I mean, it's all in the context of, the USSR also feeling that it needs to ensure that it survives Nazism and, the invasion of Hitler and the Nazis and everything else, and defeating fascism in Europe, and a decision, like you said, does Moscow order it directly? Do the parties come up with, but there's a general trend among communist parties in this period around the world of kind of abandoning national liberation struggles for a brief period there. It does kind of return a little bit later, but in order to, develop an alliance, I guess, with, Western democracies against, quote unquote, against fascism. But yeah, I mean, it's a contentious topic, but I appreciate hearing. I didn't know that actual history with the Communist Party in Puerto Rico. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I have I'll say it now. It's in English actually. One of the books I used to prepare for this, I haven't read it completely because it's new, but it's Obstinate Star by Rafael Belnome, history of the Puerto Rican pro-independence movement. So it just went there. And actually here it says that Bowler, which was the CPSSU General Secretary at that moment, was one of the persons that instigated directly for the Puerto Rican Communist Party to dissolve. Like I said, my in that sense, like Walter Benjamin says, one has to be very, very wary of looking to the past with the optics of the present. But history-wise, it was not a good decision when I look at it from now. No, obviously over there you had other considerations, but I wanted to bring it because I want to bring the general fact that when people talk about the Puerto Rican independence movement, it's not straightforward. It's very we take good decisions, we take bad decisions. We are people. We have different tendencies. We have different debates, and to talk about it responsibly, you have to take those elements into consideration, because of a very, very long history of people that for me are people that I admire and I would possibly aspire to be, but they are excellent people doing excellent work. Even they made errors, so even for us to make errors, it's part of the deal, of political activism. So, at that moment, it's clear that the PPD is shifting to a more pro-collaboration with the United States. And one of the things that they do after the Communist Party dissolves is that they start to attack the CGT, the workers' union. That was one of the key elements that brought them to power. You wrote a very good book about the CGT. It's in Spanish too, but Confederación General de Trabajadores, 1940 to 1945, from Kenneth Lugo del Todo. It's an excellent book about the history of the CGT. In 1945, the PPD, Muñoz Marín, etc., are very much, or they, how to say, they accomplished the division of the CGT, because there was one side that was very pro-independence, and that in an assembly in the University of Puerto Rico, in the campus, I live near it, that's why I'm pointing that way. In the theater, in that assembly, they were going to approve a resolution of the CGT, for the independence of Puerto Rico, and it was in this moment, 1945, and Marin was hell bent for them not to do that, because they would put them against his political problem, against that objective, and the influences and the cooptation of certain elements of the CGT inside the CGT gave way to the implosion of that assembly and the creation of a division, the CGT, which was pro-government, and the CGT auténtica, the authentic CGT, which gave way to the General Union of Workers, Unión General de Trabajadores, UGT. But the damage was done. You divided in half the biggest confederacy of unions in Puerto Rico. It was like 30% to 40% of workers in that moment. Never in the history of Puerto Rico that had happened. And that really, really marked an important moment of debilitation, of regression, let's say, in worker power in the process of political activism in Puerto Rico, in my opinion, at least. While this is happening, 1946, the U.S. appoints the first Puerto Rican governor. So then you can see like the U.S. moving to an option where it's not pro-statehood, but it's not independence either. And so 1946 was the moment where Luis Muñoz Marín, and I say Luis Muñoz Marín, but obviously I don't think history is decided by people. History is decided by, class forces and groups. And so a sector, let's say the pro bourgeoisie that was aligned around the manos a la obra, the industrialization by invitation and the industrialization by substitution, that bourgeoisie that was created by those processes, which was very, very aligned with Muñoz Marín and the Muñoz Marín and the PPD, did not want to leave the United States area. No, there have been theses by various socialist Puerto Rican authors that say that in Puerto Rico the bourgeoisie is not independence; it's like, let's say, an intermediary with big U.S. capital. No, and that's one of the elements that give way that Puerto Rico is not a independent nation in that sense. No, that's one of the theories. No, but the fact of the matter is that claque of political leadership decided that you cannot be part of the pro-independence Congress that was pushing Muñoz Marín for independence and be part of the Popular Party of the PPD. And that gave way to the expulsion of the pro-independence people inside the PPD. So the PPD became more homogeneous, pro-status quo. And those people that were in the Congress created what is now known, because it's still one of the parties right now, the Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño, the PIP. And that will play an important role in the future, no? In 1947, the party, after all this happens, no, precisely the people that were in PPD, which were not aligned with that decision, and were not, let's say, the PIP in general sense is more like a social democratic, social Christian orientation. So in that sense, people that were socialists at that time, that were, for example, in the Communist Party, will not have a place inside the PIP. So the Communist Party resurfaced, and they refunded it in 1947. The problem was that the influence that they had was not the same anymore, no? But there was a very, very important debate in that moment which was between two very big Puerto Rican ideologies. I don't know if that would be the word, but people that thought and strategized about Puerto Rican independence, which was Juan Antonio Codegel and César Andreu Iglesias. Juan Antonio Codegel, a very, very important figure in the 20th century. His position was very similar to Pedro Albizu Campos in the sense that he was against participating in the elections by principle. His argument was we abide by the thesis of Albizu Campos. We cannot give legitimacy to the Puerto Rican elections, so we cannot participate. Our activism has to go around it, and our theory of political change has to move to a very confrontational type, even armed type of action.
Just to make a quick note, that Juan Antonio Corregel was a militant to the Nationalist Party too, and he used to work with Pedro Albizu Campos directly. They were like super close.
Yeah, he was a close friend. And César Andreu Iglesias, and here I can do the accreditation. I'm more of the César Andreu Iglesias line. Said that even though that might be true, the reality is that the majority of people in Puerto Rico believe in the elections, and we as socialists cannot act from what we want them to believe, but from what they believe. And in that sense, it's not that he thinks that we have to participate in elections by principle, but tactically wise, in that specific moment, it was important because it was a way to get to the people that we want to get and to see how we can create a zone of influence from there. And so that debate was very important in the Communist Party in that moment. What happened was that they exposed. That's the word. They exposed from the party Juan Corregel and sadly his wife also, and his wife was pro Cesar side, but because it was his wife, they decided to expose her too, which for me is a very sad historical note.
We would say expelled, but yeah,
Expelled.
I know what you're saying.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's the word.
No, it's
That's
okay. Yeah.
So nothing. Afterwards, the U.S. decided that Congress made a special law to make a possibility that the Puerto Ricans be able to elect their own governor, because before that it was not possible. And in 1948, they elected Luis Muñoz Marín, of the Popular Party. So while we see the consolidation of power in terms of political colonial administration by the Popular Democratic Party for 30 years, when we talk about the big transformations in Puerto Rico that have similarities with other transformations in Latin America, the process of industrialization, the process of substitution of things that are imported, and then of industrialization by invitation, the process of the transformation of many of our countries from agrarian heavy populations to city heavy populations, the abandonment of elements in terms of agriculture. All those elements happen in that process. And just to understand the magnitude, there was a limited agrarian reform in that process that I forgot to mention. One of the promises was that there was going to be an agrarian reform, and there was very limited. We're not talking about the 1959 Cuban Revolution agrarian reform or nothing like that, or even the Peruvian or the Ecuadorian one, or the Bolivian one, sorry. But it was very important in terms of the political idea behind that project, because this was a very, very big act against the Puerto Ricans' sugarcane centrals, So it was a direct attack against the colonial economic structure in that moment. Obviously, capitalism has one very, very big strength that we always have to go against, and it's very hard to kill, let's say, in a sense. It's very, very malleable. It has a very, very, very big ability to transform and to evolve, to accommodate itself in the panorama of the political process that's happening. And so what happened was that capitalism in that sense was not untouched, in the sense that it just merely transformed into that process, which was the same experience in many of the processes in Latin America, in a sense, no? And so in that sense, no, there was a limited benefactor state. Obviously, one of the elements of that limited benefactor state was the massive migration of Puerto Ricans out of Puerto Rico. So one of the theories, it was a very colonial theory, was that we were overpopulated. Because obviously capitalism cannot produce everything that people need because of its own particular contradictions. And so, but what they sold to Puerto Rico was, no, that we are too much people here. We have to export people out. And that was the origin of those big migrations of the 50s to New York, to Hartford, Connecticut, and to Chicago, that gave way to other struggles over there against racism, etc. There would not be no young lords, for example, in Chicago and New York, if it not were for those processes that were happening in the 60s, if it was not for those great migrations that happened in Puerto Rico in the 50s. And I do not say that as something positive. It was something that it was schematically created to bring cheap labor to these big factories in the United States to experience racism, to experience exploitation and enajenation, no? And all those elements gave way to those particular struggles of the Puerto Rican migrant community in those cities, no? And afterwards, Muñoz consolidates power, but in 1948, Albizu Campos and many other nationalists are liberated from prison. And when Albizu comes to Puerto Rico, that he gets by boat that day, a nucleus of university students lower the American flag in the university and hang the Puerto Rican flag. And they get all expelled, and that creates the Puerto Rican, one of the biggest strikes in student movement in Puerto Rico. In its history, there is the 1948 student strike. It is important because many of the people that participated in those strikes, including Juan Madivas, were people that later on in the 60s will have a very, very important role in the Puerto Rican struggle. 1948, Pedro Albizu Campos is liberated. He goes back to Puerto Rico. He's not the only one that's liberated. Many of the leadership of the Nationalist Party is liberated. And Pedro Albizu Campos, like I said, was very, very confrontational because he believed in the independence of Puerto Rico above all. And so as soon as he came and the student strike unfolded, he started talking again about fighting against U.S. imperialism, fighting against what he saw as and I think he was right. No, the the Popular Party was just he always saw it like for Albizu Campos, anyone who participated just was abiding by colonial rules. So he was very struck with that. He had a quote that was like, anyone who starts to slide will fall down eventually. Like he was that type of thinker, no, and political organizer in that sense. So he was very sharp in his critique.
They also called him, like, his most famous nomener was they call him El Maestro, the teacher. So he had that ability of, or he was an orator. Like he stepped up to a mic and he just took the crowd with him, and his profundity in his teachings still resonate to this day. So I just wanted to.
If you ever hear him, he had a particular metallic voice. It's very difficult not to edit, but he started, like I said, he started again to actively talk about a struggle against the U.S. and not participating in an election, and that started to get confrontational with the Popular Democratic Project, no?
Fran, I'm sorry, but I think it's also important to mention how he was irradiated with radiation.
He was experimented upon. They blasted radiation against him. Muñoz Marin said he was crazy because what he said was that he saw lights in his prison cell, and he was a chemist from Harvard, so he knew that what happened was radiation, and he knew his symptoms. Marin said that he was crazy. Obviously, he died from radiation poisoning, and Clinton in 1992 said he was sorry. That's typical U.S. The only thing the U.S. has to do is make a movie from a soldier that knew him that feel sad about him, like normal.
And the
Um,
prison was in the United States. He wasn't in prison
yeah,
here. He was in federal prison.
Do you know what prison it was?
Atlanta, I think. Yeah.
it was in Atlanta, but I don't know. I can check which prison specifically, but it was a federal prison in Atlanta. It was underground. I know, like for once he talks about it was under, yeah. But yeah, they did everything to try to completely pulverize his well-being, health, no, and they were partially, if not completely, effective in that objective, no. We've seen it before and after in countless examples, no. And so, what does the governor do? What does the Popular Party do? They create a Law 53, which was the Mordaza law. Mordaza, I don't know.
Gag.
The gag
Gag
law.
law.
Yeah, and the gag law, what established was that if you had a Puerto Rican flag, if you talk about Puerto Rican independence, if you did any of those things, you were subject to arrest. No, and even if they started to apply that gag law more directly to the Nationalist Party, everyone suffered from the gag law. Everyone that was pro-independence, everyone that was left-wing leaning, but no, against the United States, feel the repression of the gag law. And what's important because it was one of the ways that Muñoz Marín and the Popular Democratic Party extended their reign, let's say, and their hegemony in the country.
Everybody who felt pride for their fucking flag. It's like
Yeah.
absurd, like for your flag,
So while this is happening, Pedro Bisu Campos just continues to cook. He just continues to do his thing. He's been 20 years in prison and he was blasted with radiation. Who the fuck cares? He's going to continue doing his struggle, no? And so what the government does is to try to attack the medium level and the low level of the Nationalist Party, and that's when they start to say, well, if there is no political space for us, we're going to have to struggle with arms. No, we're going to have to prepare ourselves for armed struggle. And in that sense, Albizu was very clear in that his political idea was, okay, we don't participate in the election, so we want social change. And how do we do it? And so, people will say non-violent. He was not a non-violence practitioner, so he said, no, we're going to be violent about it. So he started to prepare himself for that. So the Nationalist Party was very coherent in their strategy, and they started to create preparations for that armed revolt. His objective was to bring the attention of the situation to the United Nations, because while he's preparing and he's being not constantly oppressed, be it him or the members of the Nationalist Party, Muñoz Marín is creating, or let's say lobbying in Congress, for what will be known as Law 600. And Law 600 was the law that will create the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. That's the judicial arrangement that exists to this day. And so the Law 600 was approved in 1950, and so that with that law approved is that the United States goes to United Nations to say, hey, we approve this law that gives autonomy to Puerto Rico. It does not give residual sovereignty, so technically it's bullshit, but it gives autonomies, and so we have to take Puerto Rico out of the list of territories to decolonize. And so Albizu says, and the National Party says, no, that we have to do something to create a problem here. And that happened the 30th of October of 1950, when after they were constantly, there's a new book, actually, I don't know, well, I'll look for it afterwards. There's a new book in Spanish too that talks about that process. They were constantly being, the homes of these people, like with the Black Panthers and Youngler, they were constantly being destroyed. There was no due process. They were constantly being repressed. So they did what they had to do. And so the 30th of October 1950, they did a national uprising. Ayuya. And it consisted of two attacks. It was one attack in Puerto Rico in various municipalities, and there was an attack in the United States in Blair House, because in that moment, I think the White House was being under construction or something like that. And so Truman was in the Blair House. And so two militants of the Nationalist Party, Oscar Collazo and el otro, ¿cómo se llamaba?
Griselio Torresola.
Griselio Torresola.
Let me hop in
Yeah,
right here
I'm
real
going to
fast.
sit here because there's family involved. So I'm going to let Seba take this part for a moment.
So Oscar Collazo is my great uncle. It was the day after the 30th of October. I don't know. My great uncle used to work at a newspaper joint, and he saw one of the portada. How do you say that? The cover of the newspapers, and they were calling the Puerto Rican insurrection, which was an open war against the United States, as per declared by the Nationalist Party. It was not. It was not. There was no room for doubt. They declared war on the United States. The newspaper read like Puerto Ricans shooting themselves, something like that. Like Puerto Ricans are at war with themselves. And so Oscar and Griserio, they just met that day and they just decided, yeah, so we're gonna go take a train and we're gonna go shoot Truman. Griserio Torresola used to be a bodyguard for Albizu Campos before going to New York. Oscar Collazo had never ever touched a gun in his life. And they went and they entered the premises of the Blair House. And they took out their guns. Griselio Torresola had aim. He shot a cop, killed the cop. And then they killed him in the act. And Oscar Collazo, now he shot a couple rounds, didn't hit anybody, didn't have aim, he didn't practice, and he was shot in the act. And yeah, that he was basically paralyzed from the waist down, and he was imprisoned. He was one of our longest political prisoners to be imprisoned in the United States. So yeah, that action in New York wasn't really coordinated by the main party, but Oscar Collazo was one of the heads of the Nationalist Party in New York, and they had decided that this is happening. We have to let them know that we are bringing the war to them. So that and the 1952 shooting in the Congress, which Francis was gonna tell you about, having, when you think of the United States history, how many examples can you identify of a colonial peoples going into the premises of the government to shoot them, to say you have to give us our independence now, and we are what are you? It's not a common. It doesn't happen too often. It's one of the few instances in history that has happened, and I think we're proud of that. Like we've taken the fucking guns into places where people wouldn't dream of. Yeah, Francisco, keep on going.
So yeah, and I have a particular anecdote about solidarity and the liberation of those political prisoners. But before I go into that, after the Hayuya revolt, the Hayuya revolt fails. In the UN, they have a vote in the plenary, and Puerto Rico is taken out of the list of territories to decolonize. Fun fact: when you add the opposition with the abstentions, it's more than the votes in favor. I mean, that's more symbolic, but it's not that. The ONU. I don't have a lot of. I don't know if I could say moral liking. I don't really. It's important to be there, but I don't really think that they do much. But that's another episode. But the thing is that it happens. They take it out, and there's a generalized repression in Puerto Rico afterwards. And it's important because even though, looking back now, one admires the actions of the Nationalist Party in that moment. Um, the reality is that in when that happened, no, they arrested everyone. They arrested Nationalist Party, they arrested Communist Party, they arrested anyone that is pro-independence, indifferent of their position in terms of the Nationalist Party, or indifferent of their position in terms of if they thought that the action was justified or not, or tactically wise or strategically wise, they were in favor or not. They just arrested every pro-independence person everywhere, no? And they started not to follow them in that sense. So there is an element of, we'll see afterward with Cointemplo, there was an active persecution of pro-independence fighters or pro-independence advocates in the country.
Ram, but maybe let's expand a bit on the 30th of October. Like, it was uprising planned throughout the island in different parts. Like, some people went to shoot the governor and died because they got killed in the action. Rio Piedras, people died in Jayuya. It was the first time the United States used their fighter jets to bombard their own territory, to squash down the resistance there. In Utuado, there was a horrific massacre. It was an uprising for real, and it got the boot, like with bombs and Tommy Young guns, and it was intense, and it's good to bring to memory the martyrs of that day, and to remember them such as they were, and to be grateful in a sense that they didn't back down, even though we have not won the battle yet. But it's one of those seminal days in our history, and it's something we have to fight against the grain of our cultural indoctrination in this country, to keep alive, because it's not easy to keep that day alive, right? Even like El Grito de Lares is way more recognized in a national sphere than the insurrection of the 30th of October in 1950, which was even as, or maybe more consequential, because it was more widespread, it was more coordinated.
No, and I concur just that I wanted to be, when I prepare for this, I'm just trying to establish, the different debates that are going around in those moments, and the reality, historically wise, factual wise, was that there were very big debates about what happened, and I don't say that to minimize the heroics around it. I know, I think, like Seba said, I agree that we have to remember it, we have to abide by it, we have to give our due to the people that put the courage and their blood for the independence of Puerto Rico. No, at the same time, in terms of analysis of what happened afterwards, how the thing was going, I think it's also important, to also establish that there were debates and differences on strategy in every moment. And maybe that even makes it more heroic. Maybe not. That's up for debate in and of itself. But I think it is important, because obviously you have in that moment right now, for example, the pro-independence party right now commemorates it, and I think that's positive. In that moment, they were opposed to it. So, like I said before with the Walter Benjamin phrase, we have to be very careful when you look back with the lens of the present, maybe had their reasons too to be opposed from their standpoint in that moment, no? And politics just continues to evolve, and it's okay. But I think that it's important because it created a series of not only a generalized repression against the pro-independence movement, but a series of very, very deep divides inside the pro-independence movement that gave way to a general debilitation of the pro-independence movement in the 50s. No, even with the attack on Congress on the 1st of March of 1954 that happened afterwards. No, that's when Lolita Lebrón and Rafael Casas Miranda went in. There are two more. I always forget the other two. Let me look for it because I think it's important to name them. But even afterwards, it was important in the generalized sense, no, that they the elements in terms of a political strategy, many people served jail for a long time, be it nationalist party advocates, be it any other pro-independence advocate, but many served no time in that sense. Afterwards, in the 50s, ¿tienen los nombres?
Irving Flores,
Irving Flores,
Rafael Cáncer Miranda, obviamente, y Andrés Figueroa,
Andrés Figueroa y Lolita Lebrón.
y Lolita Lebrón.
Yeah, the Lolita Lebrón said, no, that I don't come here to shoot anybody. I come here to die for Puerto Rico.
That's the crew.
Yeah, that's the crew.
And that's a picture from the day they were arrested.
Yeah, the day they were arrested.
They were like,
yeah.
And Lolita Lebrón, one of the famous quotes from her is like, why'd you come shoot for her? She was the only one that shot to the ceiling. The other ones shot to the Congress people. And she's like, I didn't come here to kill. I came here to die for my country. And she had this slick, like she was so stylish. She had this burning hot lipstick, So she was a feminist and a nationalist. And she's a hero for sure.
Yeah.
All of them.
And so, but the effect afterwards, besides, because there's a dual effect, let's say. Obviously, for us that are pro-independence, there were moments of great heroics that we remember to this day. But in terms of the political effect, immediately afterwards, there was immediate repression for everyone in pro-independence movement in general sense. Hundreds of people arrested without due process. And a general debilitation, a general weakness of the pro-independence movement across the board, indifferent of where you stand in terms of tactics or strategy for a greater part of the 50s. In terms of the 50s, when we go to the end of the 50s, the Puerto Rican Communist Party dissolves again, precisely because of the debilitating situation and the repression that they were suffering. But there starts to be let's say the chess pieces start to reconfigure. 1956, one important organization is funded in the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus, which is the main campus. In Puerto Rico, the university system is similar to, let's say, California, where there's public system. There's one University of Puerto Rico, and there you have different campuses, in California, Berkeley, Stanford, all that stuff. And here, there's 11 campuses. In that moment, there were 4 campuses. The main one is Rio Piedras, Well, when I say the main one was the biggest one, the first one that was created. And in that campus in 1956, there was an organization that was funded. There was the Federación Universitaria por la Independencia, the Pro-Independence Federation, University Federation, which was composed of students that were pro-independence. I think the name speaks for itself. Now, why was that that process important? Because many of the people that form part of the FUPI, that's how they called it, would later be part of the creation of the new struggle for independence. And they would create and found an organization that is the Pro-Independence Movement, Movimiento por la Independencia, MPI. And it will be very, very, very tightly, I don't say sealed is the word, but they will have very, very, very big relationships in process and organizationally wise, both with the situation that's going on in Cuba. No, in Cuba right now, 1956, is when they arrive, and there is a ongoing guerrilla struggle up until 1959. No, and that process will mark a lot the process in Puerto Rico, and I think that's the moment that we will have a second episode, because that's the moment that we enter into the new struggle for independence, and how it opens up a new other, no, let's say, historical moment in Puerto Rican struggle for the independence up until now.
The first action for the MPI was a telegram they sent.
I'll leave it for the second episode. That's that we left the anchor. We left the hook. We have to leave it for the second episode. Okay? No spoilers.
I didn't get to say. I didn't get to say.
I know you want to say. I can leave it to you that part, but no spoiler. You have to leave. We have to give something.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
That's a good part. That's a good story about second episode.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thank you. I mean, this has been great. I really have enjoyed listening to, this part one of this history of the Puerto Rican Independence Movement. And I look forward to getting this out to our audience and, recording part two with you, and then, doing the same. And so, I mean, the intention is, of course, to release this on October 30th. As you all mentioned just a few minutes ago, kind of the significance of that. Is there anything else as we kind of wrap up that you would want to say about October 30th and that, that significance, just to remind folks of that?
Well, I mean, I think October 30th is the conclusion of the great struggles of the nationalist party in the 30s. No, it's how it closes up. And I don't say it in a bad term. I say on the contrary, like that was the big moment. In one way, their strategy and also the government repression gave them, no. And I think it was a exemplary example. I think that's redundant, but it's an example of the Puerto Rican heroic struggle, no, of the ability of common people, to feel fear, and even with fear take actions that go beyond their self-preservation for political idea of freedom. And I think that is something noble. I think that is something for one to acknowledge, remember, and continuously, bring back, because I think that not everybody does that, and I think that's one of the elements of any agent of changing in the history of people, and the struggles for a better future in general terms. And I say not because not only of Pedro Albizu Campos, because I think that people with in their names, it's important, but I think that anonymous people that I don't know their names, and I will not know their names, do this and put themselves in that process. I think those are the people that when I think back to it, I acknowledge, because there are the people that will not be remembered and did not do this to be remembered. There are people that did this purely on conviction, on the idea that liberty is a right, and you have to fight for it. No, and I think that's what I would say about the 30th of October of 1950.
And as for me, I want to also make the point that October 30th didn't happen just like Grito de Lares didn't happen as it was supposed to happen. October 30th didn't happen as Pedro Albizu and the nationalists had envisioned the insurrection. They had gone through a series of obstacles. They had gone through arrest of some of their party members with a load of guns, like when Pedro Albizu Campos gave a speech in Humacao, ¿verdad, Fran? Era que he gave a speech in Humacao, and then they intercepted them and they confiscated a bunch of arms. So it was also a moment of precipitation, and that they saw no way out of it, that they had to act right there and right now. And in a sense, like, they were victorious because the reverberations of the date uh still unite us in struggle, still make us be steadfast, and we still, make the 30th of October a sacred day for our liberation struggle in Puerto Rico. So the other thing, in 1952, the establishment of the Estado Libre Asociado, which is what we have today, the modern Commonwealth of government, which you would literally translate into Estado Libre Asociado, free as associated state. That happened in 1952. It's no coincidence that after years of struggle, after years of armed insurrection, the ELA, which is what we call the mode of government we're at, is presented as a sort of means to pacify our nation, and it's one of the consequences of letting it be known that we are at the, how do you say, we will take matters into our own hands, and yeah, we'll sacrifice our lives, be it necessary, to fight for liberation. And 1952 was one of those chess moves from empire that resulted highly lucrative and highly effective in Puerto Rico, but they had to do it because their hand was forced, because of the struggle, of the armed struggle of our peoples in the 30th of October of 1950.
Awesome. That's a great place for us to wrap up. Appreciate you both. Look forward to part 2. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. It was an honor to be here.